This lesson is part of 5th grade Social Studies Unit 4, Life in Colonial America. In this lesson, we will be learning more about slavery in the colonies. Our learning targets for this lesson are to describe the lives of both free and enslaved Africans in the American colonies, and to explain the development of the emerging labor force in the American colonies. We will be able to explain how the system of slavery contributed to the increase in wealth of some colonists, and recognize that the slave codes were laws that helped protect slave owners while taking away all rights of the enslaved people. From the early days in the colonies, indentured servants worked as laborers. Many indentured servants agreed to work for 7 years in return for their passage to America. They signed a contract with the ship owners, who sold the contract to colonists on arrival in America. Other indentured servants were in debt or criminals and forced to work as indentured servants to pay for their debt or crimes. The first people from Africa were brought to Virginia in 1619, and historians believed they were sold as indentured servants and likely set free after 7 years. The need for manual labor in the colonies grew, especially in the southern colonies, where many workers were needed on the large tobacco plantations. Enslaved Africans were forced to provide labor in the colonies for the rest of their lives. New laws, called slave codes, formally protected the rights of slave owners and took away all rights of the enslaved people. There are very important differences between indentured servants and the people who were enslaved. Indentured servants came to America voluntarily and had a mutual contract that protected their right to get out of indentured servitude. Enslaved Africans, however, came to America against their will and were forced to work under the system of slavery for the rest of their lives. They had no rights. In fact, their children were treated as the property of the slave owner. Many were taken away from their families and sold as soon as they were old enough to work. Slavery existed in all 13 colonies during the 1700s. The map shows the numbers of enslaved Africans in each colony in 1770. We can see that slavery was much more prevalent in the southern colonies. The darker blue colonies on the map had more than 40% of the population comprised of people who were forced to live under slavery. In the years following the American Revolution, many northern states outlawed slavery. The southern colonies, however, were very dependent on the money they made from the labor of the enslaved people and continued to profit from the system of slavery until after the American Civil War. The life of people forced to live under slavery was extremely difficult. Their workday was often 16 hours long or more, and they worked 6 days a week. The living quarters for enslaved people were usually small and cramped. Many lacked a real floor or any type of furniture. Though the living and working conditions were harsh, perhaps most devastating was the treatment of many enslaved people by the slave owners. They could be beaten, whipped, sometimes killed. They had no rights. They could be bought or sold at any time. Families were separated and never saw their husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, or children again. There were some African Americans who gained freedom. Although it was clearly desirable to be free in comparison to slavery, their lives were not easy either. Freedom could be obtained in several ways. In the early days, some African Americans were granted freedom under indentured servant contracts. Also in the early days, some people were allowed to purchase their freedom. A few were freed by slave owners voluntarily. Others took great risks to break free from the horrors of slavery and managed to escape. Once they were free, most free African Americans lived in urban centers. Here, there was greater economic opportunity, and they could find a sense of community among others. However, the freedom they experienced was very limited. They faced discriminatory laws and low wages. Some were even kidnapped and forced into slavery. They did not have the same rights as white people did, and very little protection from the unfair treatment they experienced. Let's review. True or false? Slavery existed in all 13 colonies. That is true. The slave codes gave rights to the slaves that protected them from harsh treatment of the slave owners. That is false. The slave codes actually gave rights to the slave owners and took away the rights of the slaves. True or false? Slave labor helped the economies of the South to grow very fast. That is a true statement. True or false? A main difference between indentured servants and enslaved Africans was that indentured servants came to America by choice and were able to get out of servitude after 7 years. That statement is also true. True or false? The northern colonies depended on slavery more than the southern colonies for the growth of their economies. That is false. It was the southern colonies who most depended on the slave labor for the growth of their economies. You may click next if you are ready to take the quiz, or you may go back and watch again in order to prepare for the quiz.